let me know when you're ready. Right, thanks. Okay, welcome everybody to Harpenden Town Council, and this is a meeting of the Corporate Policy and Finance Committee, and on the 13th of January. This meeting is a special meeting in a way of the committee to continue the discussion which was held last week on the 2021 budget. What we have in front of us is a report from officers for our consideration. I think I'd like to do three things actually. The first thing is to thank officers for putting together this report. They've done a terrific amount of work in a very short period of time, and we're very appreciative of it. So thank you, Carol and Daniel, for getting this together in such a short period. I know it was not an easy job to do. Okay, the second thing I'd like to do is perhaps for those people who are not closely involved in budgeting, is to talk a bit about the budgeting process and how it normally works in organisations. And one of the things, our difficulty with the budget next year is that I think we have a bit of a flaw in our budgeting process, which we need to consider and then perhaps bake in to our committee structure next year. The process normally, which happens in companies, is that there is a bottom-up budgeting where different departments and groups, or in our case committees, put together their aspirations for the following year. They don't, in our case, this is not necessarily done as a consistent exercise, but it's done as projects and initiatives are brought forward during the year for committees to consider. Now, one of the benefits of that is it gives each committee an enormous amount of information about that project, so they can make a good, well-balanced decision about it. One of the downsides in our current system is that each project is looked at in isolation. So decisions are made on projects without an understanding of the implications on overall budgets, in particular the overall budgets over a 3 or 4 year period. So people will say, okay, we need to repave this car park or put a new, and they will look at the costs and they will say, yes, that looks good. But they're always looking at the projects in isolation. What they're not doing each time is saying, what is the impact on the budget and what is the impact on the plan over the next 3 years? And I think in the past, it's not tended to be an issue because the council has been ambitious, but it's not been, it's in no way been as ambitious as we are at the moment. I think it's becoming a problem because we're much more ambitious as a council. We've got much more assets than we've had historically, and we're much keener to do things on behalf of the town and on behalf of residents. So what's actually happened is because of this way in which the projects have been put together, when they're consolidated for the first time through the budget process. And what's actually happened is that the impact has been a massive increase in precept to 20%. And I think that that is something that we need to consider in the light of changing circumstances. Now, when the projects that went into the budget, and even during the first stage of budget preparation, COVID has been around since last March, but the implications on people's lives, their livelihoods, and on business is becoming much more serious, perhaps over the last 2 months. So even since this group saw the budget in 2019, We've got more information about what the implications of COVID actually are. We know that it's going to go on a lot longer than anybody really thought. We know that business is going to be impacted, and we know that our own revenue and our own council is going to be impacted substantially. We're seeing it in other councils. Other councils are struggling with their budgets for next year. Many councils have huge budget gaps, and I would say most councils in the country are in the process at the moment of trying to bring together, and this is even councils with no aspirations and not trying to do anything new. They're trying to just paddle water and pay for their obligatory responsibilities with without making huge increases to precepts. Now, what makes us different from the majority of councils is we're not a district council or a county council, so we do not have a cap on our budget. Yeah, because we are a parish council, we can set a budget at any level we want. But that does, just because we can do it, doesn't mean to say we should do it. So that's that third thing. If we look at what's happening in Harpenden, the ways in which different resources are being used has changed. People are concerned. Many people, young people, I know many young people in their 20s who are struggling to find work at the moment. As they come out of university, businesses aren't hiring. So there's a whole generation who are going to be struggling, and their parents will be struggling because it's their parents who support them. Many people are fearful of their jobs, and a lot of people that I know and know of have been, they're not working at the moment, they've been furloughed, which means that their income has substantially dropped. As well as the implications of it, we have to look forward to 2021-22, and that issue with people having perhaps less money and there being more concern around about cost. We do have to take that into account, even more than we did, perhaps more than we did last year. That's the last calendar year. And we just have to be sensitive to the fact that many of our residents are struggling and don't want to see increases. And although absolute increases from the town council might be small, I think there is a point. A lot of, if everybody thought, well, it's okay to put it up because this is small, eventually it turns into a large number. And I think the public sector needs to take a lead in this and ensure that they don't, in effect, put prices up, in this case, put taxes up to unrealistic levels, irrespective of of course, pretty much everything we want to do is stuff that people would want, is excellent, that you cannot fault it. At the same time, you have to cut your cloth according to your means. So going back to what I was saying about budgeting, we have been taking a bottom-up approach to budgeting in the council. Looking at the recommendations for the council, I think we have to consider that when we look at these recommendations. And I would like to suggest to this committee that we do something, which is that before we start thinking about how we move forward with the budget, we agree in this committee what we would like to see as a percentage precept rise. Yeah, that way we are doing the second part of budgeting. The first part of budgeting is bottom up, where you put together all your aspirations and then you consolidate them. The second part of budgeting is what Xerox calls top down. So they have bottom up, top down budgeting, which actually spread out of Xerox in the 80s and 90s, and most businesses would do it that way now. And the top down approach is to say, okay, how much are we prepared to increase our costs? which is effectively what we're saying with the budget. How much are we prepared to grow, or should we be in decline? Yeah. And so what I'd like to do is to go around and have each councillor just tell me their view on what they think the headline figure for precept should be, and what they think that those drivers actually are. And I'll start at the top left on my screen.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to stop you in flow. This is a formal meeting. You need to follow the agenda, so we need to start with apologies and declarations of interest.
Oh, okay, that's great. I will do that. There has been one apology from Counts and a substitution, and Councillor Hill has been substituted into the meeting. And if you have any questions, Harry, please let me know, because I know it's not easy to suddenly be dropped into the middle of a discussion, yeah, without having been at the previous discussion. So just ask. Let's have a look.
And Chair, the committee needs to resolve to accept that apology.
Do we accept the apology? Can I see a show of hands? Okay. Anything else, Mr. Cheevers? Because
so, Chair, you just need to ask about declarations of interest of councillors.
Oh yeah. Are there any I'm seeing this as an extension of the last discussion, but I guess in a way it's a new one. Are there any declarations of interest? Roger?
Yeah, as ever, on a precautionary basis, a declaration of a non-pecuniary personal interest arising from my being a councillor of St Albans District Council and a member of the Rothamsted Park Management Committee of that council. Thank you.
Rosemary?
Likewise, personal non-pecuniary interest as a district councillor.
Okay, well, can we also take it as a personal non-pecuniary interest as a district councillor for Councillor Bert Paul and myself also? And we had the discussion last time, and sort of the fact that people have allotments, etc., is you don't need to say that. Okay. So I would now like to move on to the purpose of the report and the recommendations. And first of all, I'd like a show of hands, please. Do you agree that we move the discussion on the overall precept figure and we take that debate first? I see a show of hands. Who agrees? Councillor Farmer, do you agree? Yeah. Councillor Paul? Councillor Decourt? No? Okay, who disagrees?
No, I don't agree. I don't think this is the right approach, but you've got a majority, so you probably will carry on.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Decourt. So our first is the debate is around the overall precept figure. Would anybody, I mean, I would like councillors to perhaps give their views on this. So can I see who would like to start? Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're right. Of course, there are two ways of approaching it, and we have decided to approach it top down, not flying blind, because we've seen all the proposals, and as you say, they're excellent ones. In an ideal world, where money was no object, we'd do it all as soon as we can. But unfortunately, in the real world, with all the pressures, despite the fact the amounts of involved for the precept of the town council are not large in absolute terms, I think it's incumbent on us to set an example as a local council, albeit a parish council, and not be out of line with what other local authorities are doing. In terms of what's the right figure, it's very subjective. Ideally, less than 10%, but you know, one can argue a bit more, a bit less. But that's what my personal approach.
Okay, Councillor Turnbull.
You're muted.
You're still muted.
Sorry, my mistake. Thank you, Chair. I concur with that view in principle, but one or two comments. Firstly, I think any number we come up with, in the one area of conjecture or where there's a great deal of uncertainty is the income the council will generate. I would suggest that any move downwards on income comes out of reserves. So we sort of put that to one side, and therefore we're only really looking at what we have to do on the costs side. And I think if we are going to have to cut costs, and I accept we do, I mean, it's what one would like in the world is not always what one can achieve. And I think times going forward are going to be very, very hard. So I think we've got to keep what is essential, and where there are cuts, it's got to be cuts which is desired expenditure but not essential expenditure. And it may well be certain projects that got to be cut or postponed, or the cost spread over a much longer period. That having been said, my reaction is the uplift should not be more than 10%.
Okay, Councillor Farmer.
Well, I agree, ideally not more than 10%. I think not. I don't think it's so much a matter of making cuts. I think looking at the budget, it's a matter of looking at, we have a lot of projects and a lot of ambitions. It's not, I think it's not a case of saying we're not going to do something. I think it's a matter of saying when we're going to do it. I think there are projects, there are items that can be deferred for a year or 2 years. This year is going to be difficult, and I think we can do that. And it may also be, that there are items that can be capitalised, but I think it's matter of, largely, I think it's a matter of timing.
Thank you. Councillor Drake.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with principally with what the previous councillors have said. At the regional CPF, I voiced two particular concerns. The first one was mentioned by Councillor Turnbull, which was the fact that we had maintained income at a particularly ambitious level, and given the current circumstances, I concur that my preference for that would not be to further put pressure on the precept, but to utilise reserves. However, we do have to take care that the current level of general reserve is just over £500,000. I'm happy for Dan or Carl to correct me on that, but it's about 500,000. And say a shortfall of 100,000 would reduce us to about 400, which would be only about 4 months reserves, which seems to me to be quite on the low side. So we do need to take care there, realizing any precept that we set here may well be not sufficient given the possible loss of commercial income. The second area is, the second concern I put forward is exactly the one that we've been discussing, which is the level of increase of the precept, and the fact that we needed to be in a position to be able to justify that to our residents on the basis that we have properly and robustly examined that expenditure. Therefore, yeah, I mean, if you ask me for a level, very difficult. I'd be tempted to say around 12, but we must also bear in mind that we have actually effectively already got 3% of, or nearly 4% actually, in the fact that the SADC special charge will come down against Rothamsted Park.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. Any other comments? Councillor Paul, and then Councillor DeCourt.
Making sure as I'm muted. Yeah, I too, like others, would prefer to see a budget precept just below the 10% figure. I have a solution on one item, but you can ask me that later, unless you want me to just put it out in me within a moment.
No, it's okay. I'll go through and see if anybody's identified anything they think suitable for being delayed in a minute. Yeah. Okay, Councillor DeCourt.
Yep. My figure that I'm happy with is £15, which is a net £12 to the taxpayers of Harpenden.
So you're not going to give us a percentage, Councillor de Court?
I don't need to. I can work in the absolute figures, which are more relevant to this. But you know,
Well,
it's 20%. I know net it's
people see
16%.
percentages.
Sorry, can I just speak for a second? I don't like words being put in my mouth. So if you want a clarification, the preset rise, 85% of it is matters that are completely outside our control. The special expense transfer, the income lost due to COVID, the state of the economy, the fall in the district council collection rate, the inflation provisions for contracts and salaries, and the earmarked reserves put in the budget for last year of 46,000, which can't be repeated. Net off the last loan repayment, that comes to £12.7. The debating point will be the residual amount, which takes us up to £15, is 2.1, which is a consequence of the Rothamsted Park transfer. So if we have a conversation, we should have a conversation about whether we want to do that transfer or not, because everything else is entirely out of our control.
Councillor de Court, in fact, much of this budget is completely in our control. In life, you get changes which you have to deal with. And when things happen, you have to adjust something else to take account for it. You don't say it's out of my control and therefore I'll pass the cost on. I'm afraid we just have a fundamentally different view on how things should be managed.
Sorry, I do need to speak there, because again, you put words in my mouth. I lived for 58 years and I've had plenty of things that have occurred in and out of my control. Thank you. Yeah. I've also done major budgets in my time.
Thank you, Councillor de Court. Only one person, Councillor Hill, your view?
Thank you, Chair. Just with my concern about this approach, but I understand the committee's agreed it. But the problem with setting the preset first is that, you know, if you agree to a percentage figure, say it be 10, 12%, then afterwards we're now going to have to be looking through the budget to find things to cut. And when I was looking through it earlier, I'm not sure. So say we agreed, is it 100? Say we agreed a 10% preset increase instead of 20%. You're looking at £105,000 gap in the budget, and I'm not quite sure that we're going to be able to find that later in the meeting from what you might call like non-essential activities or projects. I think if we start going into delaying or what I think is probably cutting, you know, essential projects, because the problem is if you don't increase the preset this year, then, you know, these essential things which you might delay for 2 years potentially, then we might struggle to find that money then, because we're already proposing to budget things in 2022, 2023, that if we delay later, then we're going to have to increase the preset then. So I'm just not sure that we're going to be, I think if we don't increase the preset to the full 20%, we're going to, or maybe even 18%, but I think probably 20%, we're going to have to cut essential things, which means a lot of sort of things like maintenance. And if you delay things, then you might find things like trees or potentially, I don't really know what you're considering, but I think we need this sort of ongoing management, which I think is really important. And a key part of, you know, the town council's business plan is to be proactive to things. And I'd just be really concerned that if we don't do it now, we might find in a few years' time we've left it, and the cost of repairs and things will be even more.
Okay, I think that's a very good point, Councillor Hill, and one we certainly have to bear into account, because sometimes there is a cost to delay, but what we have to balance is, are we prepared to take a slight uplift because of the cost of delay against the hit to residents' budgets of having a 20% tax increase in 1 year, when we are perfectly able to phase that tax increase over several years and perhaps do the work over several years? Yeah. Okay, so I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 views which is saying 10% or lower, 2 views which is saying 15 to 20%. I'll give you my view, which is that I think that many of my residents would not be happy that we cannot respond to what's going on at the moment and cut our budget to fit. I think if you're in a family where they've had a 20% decrease in their income over the last few months, there would be very hard questions about why the council can't live within its means and why it needs to increase its revenue by 20%. So I would respond to that challenge. I mean, I know perfectly well there are many families in Harpenden who wouldn't particularly notice this level or care about this level of increase, but there are many individuals and families who would, and I think we should very much take their views and the current situation into account. So I would say 10% or lower, but maybe when we see what comes out, recognising the transfer of assets from SADC, which means their tax decreases and ours goes up. So it might bring it slightly higher, but then we can look at more detail. Okay, so that's 2.1, and I think the vote is that we try to get a precept increase lower than 10% in the first instance. So as Harry has told us, that's about 100k, 105k off this budget. Okay, so we've been given a number of scenarios. Now, one of the things I'd just like to point out with us going through these scenarios and looking at these projects, I mean, there are two fundamental problems with this, well, three. The first one is that these are all the external spend. There are no administrative costs in here. And so there's no looking at anything internal in the council in terms of could anything be saved there. I gave a direction to officers at the last meeting that they should not consider headcount cuts, because I feel that we have to keep the capability to deliver our ambitions. And if we start making headcount cuts, when we come out of this crisis, we certainly won't have that capability. But there are perhaps other things that could be looked at. My guess is, and I mean, I don't know, but I would guess that a lot of those items are actually within the corporate policy and finance budget. And our budget was pretty flat. We had an increase, but it wasn't a great increase. It was more in line with inflation. So my guess is that's been looked at. But I would like to, as one of the recommendations, perhaps give that to officers to have a look at the internal administrative budget for potential savings. Could we discuss that? Would you like to discuss that, or could we go straight to a vote on it? Carol.
Sorry, Chair, you're going to have to be absolutely clear as to what you mean by that resolution.
Okay, it's things like running Park Hall, running the town council, anything which is kind of background and administrative and isn't projects which are out in the public domain. So are we doing anything on IT? Are we doing anything about processes? Are we doing any projects this year? What money are we spending? Is there any way we could cut it?
Okay, so Chair, the alternative options that have been put forward, as we set out in paragraph 3.5, I believe, is that there are no options, or in fact it's in the context at the start. We haven't looked at any alternative options where there would be immediate contractual or legal implications to us doing so. So the background administration to running Park Hall is essentially, you've got the things you would expect, like business rates and insurance and all things like that, of which there are very few opportunities. And the other side of that is the staffing implications. So of which you ruled out at the last meeting and have ruled out again here. So these are all alternatives that don't have a contractual or legal implication to the council. They can, of course, be looked at. That would be a much detailed piece of work that would need to be undertaken.
Okay, so you think there's no immediate opportunity there?
No, Chair. So the 20 or so alternatives that we've set out are the okay, immediate is probably not the right word, but the alternatives that would have the least implications contractually or legally to the council. And they would just have implications in terms of how we deliver and the standards of what we deliver. And I probably just should clarify that these aren't projects. We wouldn't class them as projects. They are part of our management works, the majority of these. So they're works rather than projects. And we've got a capital improvement programme for our project programme.
Okay. The capital improvement programme, the second thing we asked officers to do was to identify items that could be capitalised and therefore they wouldn't come out of the revenue budget. I see, has that work been done, Carol?
Chair, yeah, so there's two parts to that response. So you'll see throughout Appendix A, we refer to utilising reserves. So that's earmark reserves or capital reserves. So that would be an element of capitalising. There's a reference in the early bullet points to limited opportunity to capitalise any officer posts. So we have a project manager post, but that manager is part of the management team and carries out much wider tasks than just capital projects. So it'd be very, very difficult to capitalise any of that. And on top of that, as the kind of proper officer, I would just advise that there are significant legal question marks as to whether we would be able to do that. And there are two potential fallouts to that. First of all, we would only find out at the end of year end as to whether we'd be able to have capitalised something. So you could budget now to say it's capitalised and find out at the year end that's not possible. Secondly, we could have a big audit problem if audit deem that this isn't an appropriate way to carry out our governance by capitalising an item that shouldn't be capitalised. So there are limited opportunities and also significant risks as to whether it's even possible.
Okay, which of these do we have opportunities and how much are they cumulatively?
Are you talking about works, Chair?
Yeah. Well,
So,
I'm also talking about earmarked reserves.
So, Chair, throughout Appendix A, there are, so I can point you to reference 1.4, 1.5, 2.4, 2.5. All of these alternative options refer to reserves. So that includes capital and earmark reserves. So that's set out throughout the options.
How much capital reserves, if you add them up, how much would come out of how much of that 105k could we fund the project through capital reserves?
So, Chair, there's currently a capital reserve of 2.65 million, and we've got 691 available. So, depending on, I guess, there's a step back from this that the committee. I mentioned this last week, but it's important to set out. So, the committee is obviously recommending a budget here, and the committee can go through every budget line within this appendix and agree that, for example, Batford Springs should be reduced in spend. And the committee can use the indicated works that we've set out here as a way of deciding that. Ultimately, once that budget is set, it would be back to the responsible committee to then decide how that money is spent. So this committee doesn't have the power to decide what you're going to spend the money on, unless it's for assets that you are responsible for. So the town hall, park hall, things like that, that if you reduce the budget for those assets, we would then come back to a future committee of the CPF and say, as a result of having this revised budget, these are the things that we had planned, which are the things you don't wish to do. So you can use these works as an indicator, but ultimately, whatever the budget for that particular line is set, it will be back down to the lead committee or council to consider exactly what isn't taken forward and is taken forward.
I think we're aware of that, actually, Carl, and this is why we don't want to go through these projects and say what should be taken out. What we would like is officers to go through and say what can be capitalised and give council the another budget, actually, which says to hit the precept which has been agreed by the Policy and Finance Committee. These are the elements of the business plan that will have to, where items will have to be either capitalised or delayed. Yeah, and what I'm trying to get now is a sense of how much we could capitalise, what projects are undoubtedly revenue projects and there's no possibility to capitalise, and how much of that, the 105 gap, we could capitalise the projects.
So, Chair, if that's a resolution taken from today, we can produce that for council under the parameters that you set. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to go through all of that now, because the works that we've set out here, as we've said, these are just an indication. This isn't everything that is set out in management plans. So, you know, I could run through each one now and give you my rough estimate, but actually that would just be finger in the air, and I don't think that would be useful and not necessarily a good way to carry out the budget setting. But if you were to set a preset target, which it sounds like you're talking about, and was to set certain parameters, I don't know, that you wanted to address any gap in the first instance through the use of earmarks or capital reserves, we could then take that away and deliver a response to that at council. But I'm not able to go through now and prioritise as to which ones could be capital or earmarked. That's a much bigger exercise, and indeed longer term it needs the involvement of the kind of owning committee as well.
Okay, can I have views of other councillors on that approach? John.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that is probably the right approach, because you know, when I was saying that, you know, I believe that we should have a lower precept, I don't think you can say that unless you can see a way forward to such a number. I don't think you can do that, and I think given the extensive list of options here in Appendix A, there seems to me to be options for items to either be covered by maybe the utilisation of the capital monies that we have got, obviously within the restrictions of the use of capital monies, or against some of the earmark reserves, which seem to match off some of those opportunities, or things that maybe should be delayed. I mean, I would like to see what we can do before saying we won't do it. But I think that's the order. What items can be used from the capital reserve, what items can be used from the earmarked reserves, and what items can be delayed. For example, the 20,000 project budget may be, for example, something to look at. It's very difficult to go through here and now exactly how you reach those numbers, but looking at the tables, I would say that it would be possible to reach that. Now, the one thing I'm not is an expert on exactly what can be allocated or treated as capital for the purposes of the capital reserve under local government accounting rules. But certainly there are items in there that look not dissimilar from some of the projects that we have actually authorised for use from the capital monies, and that would mean that we could still do those projects this year without impacting the precept. So I think that would be the way to do it. What could be taken from the capital monies that we've got? What can be utilised against the earmarked reserves? And what can then be delayed? And I would have thought that a combination of those is likely to at least result in a reduction in the projected precept.
Councillor Turnbull.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I by and large concur with that view. On the other hand, the use of capital monies or earmarked reserves, I wouldn't like, how could I put it, any Mickey Mouse accounting or pushing the envelope too far in trying to allocate items to these. You know, I think if we can prudently, the answer is yes. Then going on, what we're left with, I mean, personally, I'm not going to say what my list is, but I can easily knock 100,000, not easily, I can knock 100,000 off this budget if I had to. And I think that's the position we're in. We've got to say to ourselves, we have to find savings. We've got to cut our cloth according to the circumstances. And it may mean quite a few things may have to be delayed. On the other hand, I think it might well be some desirable things that are not essential but desirable may just have to be cut. And we only incur expenditure on essential repairs and maintenance. Life is going to be tough. And that's what I keep stressing. Life is going to be tough. There's more downside than there is upside. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. This is difficult because it just feels like we're, you know, agreeing to cut a proposed budget, but you know, for understandable reasons why we don't want to go through line by what we want to get rid of. But it just means I feel like we're trying to agree to cut blind almost. You know, we're setting a, you know, almost like a cap on what we want to spend in the budget, but we're not. But I don't know what we're going to have to cut from that, because you know, Councillor Turnbull says he can find 100 grand from here, not easily, but he says he can. I can't find that and meet the council's business plans and our, you know, open spaces management plans effectively. So yeah, I quite strongly disagree with this process.
Okay, Councillor Hill, I'm afraid that every organisation and every person actually has to live their life according to a cap at some point. There is always a cap on what you can spend. So I think it was Mr. Cheevers, you had your Cal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I just want to just set an expectation. If you are minded to go down the resolved approach that we talked about around setting a budget and officers going away and producing something to that, picking up Councillor Drake's 3 points, we can do the first two, but it wouldn't be appropriate for us to do the third one. So we can set out how we can cover some things in earmarks. We can set out how we capitalise things, but anything to do with delaying work or cutting or reducing spend, then I believe that is a policy decision, and that should be carried out by councillors through committee or council. I don't think it's appropriate for officers to suggest where we should deviate away from the business plan. So we can certainly do the first two parts very easily for you, but the third part, if that was the expectation, then that would have to be something that would be considered at a committee or council.
Councillor Cheevers, could you give recommendations on deviations from the business plan?
So, Chair, I'm not quite a councillor, not yet anyway.
No, I'm just asking, given that you have, one of the things that we know is that it's a difficult situation out there, and the second thing we know is that you have an understanding of your operational capability and parameters, which we don't. If you're talking about delaying things, the person who's probably best suited to understanding what could be easily delayed when comparing across projects is not councillors, actually, it's officers.
So, Chair, the reason I made the councillor comment is because you called me Councillor Cheevers. So just to clarify.
Sorry.
And I certainly don't have aspirations to get that title, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The point I would make is that it would be a huge change in the way in which this council operates if officers are now advising on what policy or business plan would change. So
what we're asking is what projects would you have come in later? I mean, how are you going to time the projects, really? Because you're sure not going to be doing them all at the same time.
So, Chair, the works that we've set out as an example in this report, these are works that are from the current financial year, which has been delayed 12 months, and they are for the ones that were expected in the following year. On top of these, for example, so if you take the Common or the Backford Springs Management Plan, there will be year 3 and 4 works that are planned as well. So it really isn't down to us as officers to decide how best the management plan is altered, because the implications would need to be understood by councillors, I believe. So, you know, we could be challenged.
We're not asking you to make the decision, Carol. We're asking you to recommend the most risk-free, most appropriate approach.
Yeah, Chair. So that is not something that we were able to do in the context of this time frame of setting this budget.
Okay. Councillor Turnbull, you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, my reaction is we've got to, in difficult times, management at the top has got to say, this is all we can spend. We have, I think, as a committee agreed by and large that the spend has got to be 10% or less. If that means once we have had the councillors, the officers' views on what can be set against earmark reserves or capital monies, once we know what the resultant figure is, we then got to go back to the appropriate committees and say, I'm sorry, irrespective of your business plans and all the rest, this is all the money you've got to spend. How do you wish to achieve the cuts? It's as simple as that.
Well, most of the potential cuts are actually not been identified from this committee, Nigel. They're identified from the other committee, so which I believe met last night. So perhaps what one of our recommendations should be is that committee should meet a special budget to identify the projects which they wish to delay. I don't think they particularly want to cut them, but they can delay them.
That's what I mean. We've got to say the number has got to come down by X, and it's up to that committee to then decide how they produce savings of X. Simple as that.
And officers can identify. I mean, officers are better placed to identify where earmarked reserves can be released through delaying or well, it would be removing projects. And a lot of the, I'm looking at the projects, a lot of them are from the other committee also. They're not from our committee. And officers can advise on where it can be delayed or removed. And they can advise on delays on projects in the management plan. But I think we have to, as you say, Nigel, we have to give them a target. And that target,
I think that target can only be given once we know how much can be utilized, how much of the earmark reserves and the capital monies can be utilized, which I think is an officer recommendation. Once we see what's left over, that's the number we then give to whichever appropriate committee it is to find savings, amounting to that figure. Simple as that.
yes.
Life is tough, I'm afraid, and it's going to get tougher. Sorry to restate my view.
No, I agree with you. I think that's true. Any other comments about this? Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's not for me necessarily to speak up for the officers, but I think on a governance wise, I think it is wrong to ask officers to start, you know, not ripping up, but, you know, making, these are quite big changes to the business plan that council agreed. Council agreed the business plan, and by, you know, I think it's for councillors to decide, you know, to decide where they want to make the changes. I think it's not for, you know, I think it's for councillors to take responsibility to say specifically, yes, we want to cut the budget. Fine, you can do that. But I don't think it's for officers to start deciding, you know, prioritising within the business plan. That's for councillors to take priority of, and then it's for, you know, it's for councillors to say where they want to cut, and to create new management plans. Because if you're going to start ripping out from management plans, we're going to need to create a new management plan, I think, and it'd be for you know, officers to implement it. But it's not for officers to start deciding where, you know, where we want to cut. That's not right.
Councillor Hill, I think you may not understand the process we're recommending. Officers will not decide on any cuts. The council will. What officers have been asked to do is to do similar work to the DIDs and officers put together the management plan and the business plan. The councillors decided, yeah, we're asking the same process as officers did in putting together the management plan. Councillors don't know enough to put together a management plan, but we decide. Councillors will decide the budget, and they will decide it at council on a report produced by officers, which will give them either the options or the preferred solution. And we're asking officers to identify they are the people who do this job. What is their preferred solution? That's all. But you're quite right. It's up to councillors to decide, and councillors will decide. Councillor Decourt and then Councillor Butterworth.
I think it's important, as you say, that councillors provide guidance. Now, there was a suggestion, we were 5 or 10 minutes ago talking about going back to the Community Service Committee and asking them to come up with the cuts. And then there's another suggestion how we will go to the Town Council and again make a statement based on something else that the officers provide. I just think, from my perspective, I want to be really clear, because I've heard it from different parts, different people, but not in total, that the guidance that I feel must come from this committee must be that any suggested cuts are legal and don't break any contracts, as the Town Clerk has said earlier, that there is no movement through accounting sleight of hand of current expenditure into capital expenditure, which addresses Councillor Turnbull's concerns. And I think important is a third thing for financial disclosure. We need to say where, if there are suggestions of delay in projects, what the impact that will have on future precept rises. Because in the next 2 years, as the officers' report pointed out for this meeting, we have not budgeted for precept rises. If we simply move money to the next year or two, saying we could delay it, but it's essential, we just need to be honest with the taxpayers and say, yes, times are hard this year. As you've said, we've saved you £5, £6 or £7, but you will be having to pay it next year. And because that is a cost, because we have not decided to take out those works from the system. And my perspective, which is different from some other people's, is there'll be a lot of talk about magic money trees, but at the moment, all I'm hearing that is somebody's got a magic chainsaw. And I'd like to see something actually put in some specifics, because we need to be honest with people inside this council and honest with the taxpayers of Harpenden. And I don't feel we are at the moment. I think we'd be disingenuous.
I think your 4 points about how we should assess our excellent Councillor Decourt and should appear, if we could have them built into the approach which come out of this meeting. Thank you for that. Councillor Butterworth, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I should have made this point earlier in the discussion. But before I do make my point, Councillor Decourt talks a lot of sense in the points you've reiterated, Chair, that we should go into the record. We can't do anything illegal or breach of contract, etc., and what would we want to? Are we in danger of overcomplicating this process? Because budget making is, by its very nature, iterative. Yes, we want to do 24 things. How much money do we have? Oh dear, we only have money to do half of them this year. What should we do about it? That's a natural part of budgeting. And I don't see quite the constitutional points of principle that our mayor, I'm sorry, Town Clerk, I've promoted him again, has made. Because you're right, we're not asking officers to make decisions. That's for the council as a whole, or councillors in whatever appropriate organ it is. But officers know the detail better than we do, and can suggest this particular combination of doing less, doing things later, etc., would give the right figure. Now over to you, councillors. Is that what you want to do? Because it's your responsibility, and you have to explain it to the public. I don't see it as being too difficult in terms of principle or process, albeit the time is short. But that's life.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think Councillor Turnbull is right when he makes the point about we actually don't know how much of this shortfall could be covered by just the capitalisation. Officers have already identified that there are opportunities for capitalisation, but we've not got a sense of what the cumulative figure is next year. So I think we can't start making decisions about projects until we know that. When we know that, we can then, I mean, this may be a big problem or it may be a very small problem. We don't know. So that's the step one we have to find out. Councillor Turnbull.
Thanks, Chair. I think there is one point, if I can make an observation, which everyone is overlooking. Well, there was this comment about the precept in following years having to go up, etc., etc. I think I've got to stress that in difficult times, it may well, and if, let's say the economy doesn't recover, let's say unemployment stays high, let's things are tough, then it may well be the business plans that the council quite correctly has produced today, or the councillors have produced today, may have to be torn up and we start again. We may have to say, I'm sorry, these things we'd love to have done, we now can no longer achieve, and we've got to start with a clean bit of paper to cut our cloth according to what we can really charge. And I know it's a blunt thing to say, but I'm afraid to say it's something we may have to face up to if things get really, really difficult.
Well,
so so the idea of having a precept increase in following years, it may well be the same exercise has got to be done for several years until we're back into what I call the sunny times again.
The concept of lean and fat budgeting, I think, is well understood, and I know many organisations have a 7-year lean and a 7-year fat, and anybody in those industries which have that sort of pattern, they try to implement a fat budget in lean years, they very quickly go out of business. And I think we kind of have to recognise that. And so it may be that we have to do a special exercise this year, revisiting our management plans and business plan, so that it's a base case for budgeting for next year. I think that could be a useful exercise. Other comments? Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points really on just what's been raised. I just on this point from Councillor Turnbull about needing to cut the cloth according to you know, what's appropriate. That's based on the fact that, you know, I appreciate it is difficult to raise the precept to a high amount to reach our business plans, but you know, we could do it. And just also on this point of you know, trying to find this 100 grand, I think we're almost budgeting blind, hoping that, you know, another committee of this council which, you know, can find this money. I just think that, you know, if we're going to say that we're going to cut 100 grand from the budget by increasing the precept by only 10%, you know, we're going to have to, I want to say now in this meeting that, you know, if you look at Appendix 8, you know, £16,000 you'll find from a 50% budget reduction from Batford Springs, you know, 50% from if you cut 50% from the Harpen and Common, that gets you 22,000. So you cut, you know, 50% from Harpen and Common and 50% from Batford Springs, that gets you what, less than 40 grand. And so these are quite big changes, big cuts to the budget for next year. For this isn't just tinkering around the edges. So I just, you know, I just want the council to be aware that these are big changes that are going to happen, and it's not just sort of luxury items that, you know, we might have wanted to do. I think these are quite serious changes, big changes that the council is going to have to make.
Well, Councillor Hill, if you look into the detail of some of these things, it includes things like resurfacing car parks, and many people would say that to have a perfectly surfaced car park in a time of austerity is maybe a luxury. Having a horse ride in a time of austerity might be considered a luxury for a minority. So I think we have to be a lot more, well, we have to take these cuts. So where are they? They're not even cuts. We say cuts, they're delays. So where are they best placed? Councillor Farmer?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a practical point, because I know I've heard reference to sort of saying binning the business plan or start again. Point out that's not how business plans work. They're a living document. You simply adjust them as you go. I mean, business plans can be adjusted on a continuing basis because they are a living document. They're not like an annual report. They don't have a start date and an end date.
Yep. And when you've put together your business plan in a time of great opportunity, when we're in a situation at the moment when none of us can leave our homes, you know, there's no better time to revisit our objectives and aspirations. Any other comments? Okay, Councillor Hill.
Just one, last point for me. I think you might have been making the point. Excuse me if I'm wrong, but I've never, or I just want to say I've never seen, the Common, Rothampstead, areas that we might have, you might be asking the Community Services Committee to make cuts from. I've never seen it so busy during lockdown. I just think this shouldn't be seen as like a holding year for the council because of COVID. Like, for example, I know many friends of my parents who aren't commuting into London because of they're working from home, and they're taking time to spend time in Harpenden because of the added flexibility they have. And I think that it would be a real shame if we started delaying projects, cutting projects from next year. It's not just delaying, because it's cutting it from this year, and then you have to find the extra precept to fund it for future years. So this money is the precept increase is going to come over, but it just means that you have a deficit for this year. So I just think that I've just never seen Harpenden so busy with people not commuting into London, and I think people will see changes to the quality of our areas, and I think that's a real shame, and something that councillors will have to take accountability for.
Councillor Hill, I would say that we're not intending to not let people on the Common or Batford Springs, or not intended to grade it in any way. What we're talking about is how can we save a bit of money so we don't put up taxes by 20% and not do things that are optional. So they'll still be able to have their walk on the Common. It'll be exactly the same. Nothing will have changed. They'll still be able to enjoy it. I wouldn't worry. Councillor Drake.
Thank you. Yes, just response to Councillor Hill. Yes, I mean, I'm a regular user of the Common. I do a lot of walking around, and I won't see people use the Common. And obviously, if we take over off Hampstead Park, we want people to see a real value from that as well. I think the key point is that I think that looking at a lot of this spend on those particular areas, we could probably cover that over the first 2 points that I raised earlier, either from the capital windfall or from unearmarked reserves. Now, to the extent which that meets the required precept deficit, I don't know. I understand the town clerk's point about he can tell us what the impact of that is, but not necessarily direct us about the timing of the projects. But I think that just looking at the list, like Councillor Turnbull, I think that there is the monies there just based on Appendix A to arrive at the sort of position that we've talked about, without severely damaging either the Common and certainly not the Rothampstead Park project.
And I think your suggestion, Councillor Decourt, of not doing Rothamsted Park. I think we're as a council, we're very keen to take on responsibility for that. So, Councillor Paul, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a word of caution, probably. Carl will probably agree with me. Cuts we make will probably have effect on staff jobs. I know you can shift people around job descriptions, but I think that needs to be borne in mind. We don't wish to decimate the staff once we make the cuts because they're not needed. So perhaps there could be some level playing field across what we do. So there's no big effect on the staff.
We're very conscious of that because, and we're very conscious of what Councillor Hill has been saying. One of the things we want to do is to keep the capability, because this may be a temporary issue which is resolved next year. So we want to retain the capability in terms of staff, etc., so that we can maybe bounce back. And well, as Councillor Drake has said, there might not actually be an observable difference. It's just how we fund it might change. But even if there is one or two projects that don't get done, we want them to come back in the following year. Councillor Decourt.
Yeah, this is just for the public record. I think you were mistaken, but I just need you to know I did not at all suggest that we should take out Rothamsted Park. In fact, I was suggesting the opposite, that we should not. But I'm sure that was just a slip of the tongue.
Okay. No, you just said it as indicated it as the area you'd like to remove. And yeah, I'm glad to hear that because I thought we were all fully on board. I'm glad.
Well, yeah, you heard it the first time and now the second time. So I just want to say I didn't change my mind. I was clear all the time about it. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Right. So I think we have gone round the houses with this, and what in essence we're saying is that we would like to see the capital, the impact if we capitalise these projects. In terms, officers have an indication of the sum we're looking at and how much of that could be achieved through capitalisation. Carol, you wanted to say something?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to mention something in relation to Councillor Paul's point about staffing, and just to say that the sorts of works that you've got here are largely the external works that we have to buy in. And I think I'd just like to, committee will be aware of this, that we've got a brilliant staff team already, and actually staff are out delivering things. So, you know, there's a whole host of stuff that gets delivered directly by the officer team. And so these are the sorts of initiatives that that we buy in services for. So if you stop doing some of these or delay some of these, you know, the officer team are still very busy delivering other stuff within their areas of expertise, which I think was broadly Councillor Paul's kind of question, I think.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Can I say, Carl, it did cross my mind before I said what I said. So, you know, mostly external work, isn't it? External costs. Yeah.
We absolutely want to support the staff. I mean, they're doing a really good job in difficult times, and we should be supporting them. Anyone else get any general comments? Okay. I'm going to make a suggestion about how we move forward. I mean, we don't want to be sitting here for the next hour talking about projects that actually most of us haven't got detailed knowledge of. Can I ask this committee if they would agree that we take officers first? We've already agreed the precept figure that we want to move to. That we then
we haven't actually voted on the precept yet.
Okay, we'll vote.
Yeah, you just indicated, but we didn't actually.
Can we vote on that the precept is held at under 10%? Those in favour? Okay, that's 6. Those against? Okay, thank you. 6-2. Right. So having established that, we then ask officers to do an analysis to see which of the projects can be capitalised. Yeah, and having done that, we'll see if there is still a gap. There may or may not be. However, if there is a gap, we're then going to have to look at projects that could be delayed, so that we could recommend their delay delay to full council. And of course, it's council who will then make the decision on that. So there'll be a change to the business plan to deliver the agreed precept and the agreed budget. My suggestion on that is, rather than try to get committees, that this committee agrees that that should be delegated to myself, and perhaps the chair of the other committee, that I believe is Brian Ellis. He will have a knowledge of what that committee's agreed, and between us and officers, we can perhaps, if there is any gap, there might not be, we can analyse and identify the projects which could be put forward. We might even give options to council for their decision. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make an amendment to that recommendation so that this committee asks the Community Services Committee to have an extraordinary meeting to discuss the changes. So it's not just the chairs of these two committees. Just so.
Well, that is actually going to be a time issue, I think, Councillor Hill, because we had a serious time issue just getting this committee to sit in terms of getting the papers. The issue is they're getting the papers together for council, because they have to be done next week.
Do I have a seconder for that recommendation?
Okay, can we vote on it? Those in favour? So those against? So I think that recommendation falls. Okay, can I have a vote on, we get the two chairs of the committees to have a look at it based on their knowledge of what's been happening in the committees. They, of course, are not making any decisions on this. All they're doing is assisting officers to put together a paper. Decisions will be made by council. Mr. Cheevers.
Yeah, Chair, can I just clarify that the wording of the vote you're about to take? So you're suggesting that if the earmark reserves and the capital reserves can't be utilised to bridge the gap, it would be at that point that the chairs would then be engaged. If the earmark reserves and capital reserves can be utilised, then there will be no need to engage the chairs.
Yes.
That's the basis of the vote, yeah?
Yes. That's exactly the basis of the vote. So can we have a vote on that? Those in favour? I think that's 6. Those against? That's 2. Okay. So I think we're there. I think we've got we've agreed where we are. We've had a good discussion about it, and we have a way ahead so that we can get the papers to council. When do the papers to council have to be done by, Carl?
So the draft papers, Chair, have to be produced by Friday, and they go out on Tuesday.
Okay, so we're going to have to. When would you have the work done on the capital?
I think, Chair, we'd be in a position to know probably Friday morning, Friday lunchtime.
Okay, I will contact you. What I'll do is I'll leave time available Friday afternoon, yeah, and if you contact me then, and I'll contact Councillor Ellis and make sure he's available at that time as well. If we're needed, we can talk it through with you. Okay, is there any other comments? No? Okay, well, I think, thank you. Well done, everybody. We've got there. And thank you for your help and your contribution. In particular, thank you to Daniel and Carl and for the hard work we've put in on this. I mean, budgeting is always tricky. I think it's been trickier than normal this year. And thank you both very much for your help with this. Right, thank you all. Have a good evening.